I asked him if he had an opportunity to read what I wrote. He said, I did. And he looked at me really weird. And he said, it saved my life. He said I got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore. It was at that point I was going to take my life. He said I sat down by the side of a tree. I opened my bag to get my gun, and your story was in there. He said, your story saved my life.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Authors on Mission podcast. Our guest today has conquered it all 30 years in cybersecurity, protecting systems from threats and attacks. But the most devastating attack came, it wasn't from the company's servers, it was against his heart, his home, his identity, and no firewall in the world could have protected him. So, on today's podcast, we're going to be celebrating the courage it takes to turn pain into purpose and wounds into wisdom. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission, and we are speaking with Francis DeLellis, whose journey from tech executive to published author began in the most unlikely place, and I'm looking forward to chatting all about it. His book, Brokenness and New Beginnings, proves that sometimes our greatest qualifications come from our most unwanted experiences. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Appreciate your time and having me here today. And quite honestly, I feel pretty humbled considering the stature of some of the guests that you've already had on your show, so and their background.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Well, we invite all authors from all walks of life onto the show. And the reason why is because everybody does have a story to tell, regardless of if it's from one experience or another. It's always important to shine a light. So, yeah, I'm very much looking forward to this.
Okay.
But yeah, before we dive into the book itself, I always like to give my authors a chance to chat about their experiences a little bit of background. You had a successful 30-year career in financial services and technology. And then you became an author. You always mentioned that creative writing was a hobby. So, what catalyst moved you from tech to writing, or writing from yourself to writing for others? What exactly sparked the transformation?
Yeah, quite honestly, the desire to write was something that struck me at a very young age. I would always use writing as a mode of getting my thoughts and feelings out instead of keeping them inside. So I would write stories, short stories, poems, um, just literally anything that I could that would be stream of conscious. And that actually carried its way and very well for me when I ended up getting into the situation that I did with my marriage. And when I was told by my counselor that journaling would be a good idea, so it was a natural fit. And it was through that journaling that I ended up producing Brokenness and New Beginnings.
Yeah, I get that. And it kind of just happens because of life and the way things worked out. But it's great that you had that opportunity to kind of, shine a light on that creative spirit that you've been
Yeah.
wanting to get across.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the book itself a little bit, you do open with the opening line of Devil one, me zero. I wonder if you can shine a light on that for us. Explain what spiritual warfare looked like for you in this daily life of crisis. I do love that phrase a lot, and I think it perfectly, captures it. But and shine a little light on that for us. Why exactly that
Sure.
phrase? Where how did that? Yeah, how did that
Sure.
come to be?
Yeah, it really felt as though I was in a losing game, right? There it was a zero-sum game for me. And you know, the devil, as I believe, strikes you with obvious attacks, all right, in terms of sadness, confusion, anger, begins to start to play with you after a while and manifests in the form of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The old FUD: you're fat, you're ugly, you can't do this, you can't do that, you won't find anybody, etc. And then it begins to develop even more in terms of significant events in your life where you feel as though you're making progress and you get knocked down. And I'll give you an example. Um, I recall in the early stages of my separation, there was still supposedly hope to mend the relationship, and I believed that, and we were working through it. My mother came down because she was a good mother to help me out and console her son, the youngest. She would say the baby, and she loved this Japanese restaurant in the area. So I took her to the Japanese restaurant, and we were just talking about where things were going. And my mom was always big about hope. You always need hope. You always have hope, right? Don't say you don't have hope. Well, we had a great dinner and we were wrapping up. I stood up and I was walking out just slightly ahead of my mother. And as I was walking out and I looked to the right, I see my daughter and her mother and her mother's boyfriend and his kids.
Mm.
So my mother, being my mother, pushed me along, and uh, she walked over to the table, God bless her, and gave my daughter a hug and said it was nice to see you. And she looked at my now ex-wife and said, "I hope that you enjoy your dinner." And we walked out. So in that example, you're sitting there and you get to a point where you have hope, right? You just feel not like you're, in seventh heaven, but it's like, okay, I can get up tomorrow. There's something to look forward to. And next thing you know, right, your legs get chopped out from underneath you, and it just happens in a moment like that. So it could be anything small in my mind, to doubt, fear, uncertainty, to some big shock like that event.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely is something that would come right out of a sitcom, right?
Yeah.
That just happens. My goodness. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess it just goes to serve as a piece of advice for anyone that's filled with, rage and anger or perhaps even hate that, it does get better and maybe not perfect, but it's, life does go on. And I guess that's kind of what you learned from it. Would you agree? Or what do you think?
Yeah, 100%. And the hope that I want to give anybody who is hearing this that might be in the beginning stages uh, of a divorce or separation is that things do get better. Time does heal wounds, but it takes some work, right? It doesn't just happen. And for example, you had mentioned, being filled with hate. Um, I think that what I learned is I need to prepare. I need to prepare for eventual landmines. So, for example, what if I see her friend? What if I see her parents? Um, what if she makes me look bad in front of our kids?
Right.
And you need to try to develop, a rational mind So when you're in the midst of all of that anger and hate, um, really, it's hard to do, but I found stepping back, right, and getting rational really helped me heal. So I would say get rational.
Yeah, I agree with that. You just have to put a logical head on, see it with clear eyes, and to
Yeah,
get a clear perspective of it all. Definitely.
yeah,
So transitioning a little bit into the writing process, because we are a podcast for authors and we love to chat about writing tips and tricks. First off, I have to say this is obviously a very complicated topic to talk about, something that I'm sure, was painful going through and also painful to relive as you're writing it. So, what was that like exactly? The process of remembering, plotting it out, outlining it into the book, revising it. How did you cope? How did you balance that with your own, mental well-being? How was that?
yeah. Well, my sister had gone through a similar situation, and she found hope in a program called divorce care. So, very early on, I found myself getting involved, with a program that was out there to help people overcome the challenges of separation and divorce and navigate that path. Um, so, I was able to use that as a mechanism. I tend to be a very structured person, being technical mindset, right? Everything's a process, put everything in a spreadsheet, walk your way through it. Um, but I had to try and go step by step from the very basics. I talked about the destruction of life as you know it. You go from a position where you're coming home and your kids are meeting you at the door to you open the door and nobody's there, or you come in and sit down with dinner with your family to you come home and sit down at a table, right, of one. And you begin to say, how am I going, what do I need to do in order to just do the basics, right? Just to get up, go to work, just to, you know, get I'm not great at dressing, so wardrobe was not something I was always great at. But you begin to think about those sort of things. You have to become good at whatever it is that perhaps your spouse wasn't. So I think you navigate it by stumbling upon it, and realizing, wow, I never thought about that, right? I need to make time in my schedule to go, pick up my kids where it would just be normal, right? After dinner, you just leave and go as a family, um, step by step. I don't know. I don't know if uh, logic is something most people think about when trying to navigate divorce and life after. But really, there are things that you need to do in just a step by step basis in order to build, right? One day at a time, one foot in front of the other, which I mentioned in my book, right?
Yeah.
All you can do is one day at a time, one foot in front of the other, and make notes on how you can improve.
Yeah, I mean, that's really all you can do, right? Just one foot in front of the other, small steps, and just take it day by day. That's really all it is.
Yeah.
So thank you for that piece of advice. I think a lot of people can definitely learn from that too. And I think that this kind of goes back into the book when you actually talked about your soul shock moment,
Yeah.
which kind of was the beginning part of it all. In the quote said, "My initial soul shock came during one of our marriage counseling sessions. The words will forever be burned into my mind. I sat on one edge of the couch, and my wife sat on the other. I'm done. It's over. It's through." So that quote, I can tell, it just is written out of pain. It's written out of that memory. But like you said, it's day by day, things did get better, I guess, right?
Yeah.
A
Yeah,
little.
they do. You don't think that they will, but for anybody out there listening, struggling, it does. Again, there is work that you need to do in order to make that happen. And ultimately, I think that's probably one of the very key points is nobody's going to do it for you, right?
Mm.
Um, there were times where I found myself just sitting in the house like a recluse, and I had to force myself to get up and get out, right? To do things that I wasn't comfortable doing. I usually did everything with my, wife or kids, and now you're confronted with the situation where you're doing it by yourself. And
Yeah.
for some people, that's, no issue. They do it. I always, you know, I defined myself through, being a father, being a husband, being a loyal boss, coworker, etc. And when you cut out, the core of who you believe you are, you know, um, it's painful, right? It really is painful. So again, the good news is there is hope.
Absolutely. And I love that. And you're giving hope to so many others by writing about it too. However, you did mention that it actually took you 2 years to begin writing it. You mentioned sitting at your kitchen table, deciding to write about your experience, but it took 2 years later to actually do it. So, what was the moment that made you decide, you know what, I should put this down on paper? What was that change like?
Well, when I was sitting at my kitchen table for the first time alone eating, it was a defining moment in my life.
Mm,
And I realized that life as I knew it would change forever. I didn't know what was on the other side, but I knew that it was going to be different. And I guess I feel like I was blessed with the realization that, you know what, I'm not the only one going through this. I knew others who had gone through it, family members who have gone through it, etc. So I'm going to find some way. I don't know how, but I'm going to find some way to help others get through it. And I really didn't know how I was going to actually accomplish that mission. And again, I usually worked through pain and challenge through, journaling and short stories. So I promised myself that, I would help in some manner, and hopefully it would be through written word. I tend to communicate better in writing than what we're doing right now. Um, but I just felt like I had to overcome my own challenges and begin jotting things down in order to try to find a way, navigate a path to answers for others. Would I encounter somebody, which I did, would somebody be, in my job that is struggling with it? What can I do? Write things down, help people when you see them in need. So it was sort of by accident, um, because I had done that, and uh, like I said, I promised myself that I was going to help. So early on, I had mentioned that I went to a divorce care program,
yeah.
and that program was really, really awesome. And during that program, I journaled. So I was doing creative writing and journaling, and I began to organize some of those thoughts. But that process didn't start until, right, um, 2 years after that divorce class. I had it was sort of crazy, if I may, if you'll indulge me. Um, I had attended the divorce care class, fantastic. I got out, I was working, wanted to help somebody. The very first thing I thought of was let me go and try to share some of my wins, right, with others who are in the program now. I had known the facilitators, they were very good, and they were kind enough to have me. It gave me purpose and it helped them. While I was while I was doing that, I ended up meeting a gentleman, a young guy who was really struggling. He really reminded me of what I was going through when I did very early on. And I I ended up going out to dinner with him one time. And what was funny is I had a draft of something that I wrote with me because I was going to give it to the facilitators. And I was going to, see if they thought it would be something they could pass out, for example, to give others hope. But it never presented itself. The opportunity to do so never presented itself. So I just packed it back up and took it with me. Well, when this gentleman and I went out to dinner, um, like I said, he was struggling. And I said, I wrote something that might help. Right. I said, would you mind looking at it and, letting me know what you think about it? And he did. So after dinner, we left, we went about our business. Couple of weeks through divorce care came and went. I saw him, he saw me. Um, a little while later, probably about 3, 4 weeks later, we decided that we would go have dinner again. And it was at that dinner that I asked him how he was doing. I asked him if he had an opportunity to read what I wrote. And he said, I did. And he looked at me really weird. And he said, it saved my life. And I was like, whoa, what? Wasn't what I was thinking. And if I may, he told me a short story of his
Mhm.
own where he indicated, he said, I was, as you know, so low, and I truly didn't believe there was any hope. I miss my wife. I miss my kids. That's who I believe I am, right? A father and a husband. I was like, whoa, man, this is me. And he said, I got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore. He said, I got my backpack, got my dog, went out to the woods, and it was at that point I was going to take my life. He said I sat down by the side of a tree. I said goodbye to my dog. He said I opened my bag to get my gun, and your story was in there. He said
Wow.
he said your story saved my life. Sorry, how do you tell that story without getting a little emotional? But um, that changed my life forever. Again, fast forward, I hadn't really told anybody that story, and but it was the impetus to get me to try to start to formalize, right? Let me make this better. My goodness, right? And all I'm thinking of is I'm just going to make it better, and then go back to divorce care and tell them you guys need to hand this out. um, but it didn't. Time passed. I ended up just working on it here and there. Years later, as I indicate in my book, I end up meeting my wife. We're enjoying the early stages of our marriage, et cetera. And for some reason, it got to a point where I told her the story, and she looked at me and said, You need to write that book. And I was like, oh man. I was like, I've been trying for so long, I don't know if I can really do it, et cetera. And she said, it helped one person. There's one more. There's got to be one more. Right. So, anyway, to answer your question, it was a very long process, and it just sort of happened over time through a weird series of events, and something that I thought I could just sort of pass out and help people became Brokenness and New Beginnings. And really, my wife was the impetus for making that a reality. She pretty much scolded me until I got it done. So
Wow, well, definitely an inspiring tale, and I think that's what every author is looking for at the end of the day is to have,
mm,
um, a positive story of feedback showing that you have made a difference. That's incredible that you were able to
yeah,
experience that, and it's very good that you were able to get it out on paper and share it because of that. Now you're saving lives.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you never know. That's what it taught me. You never know, how you're going to help somebody, and it's really not necessarily in the way that you think you will, right? It's like, okay, I'll go to divorce care, you know, do what it is that you fear and try to find a way to turn it into a positive. I did, and next thing you know, it it got out of hand and became a book. So
Exactly. Well, hey, I'm glad that it all worked out and here we are now, right? That's
yeah,
why we
exactly.
write. That's why we have those impactful
Yeah,
stories to share. And even if you don't think your stories worth sharing everybody, you never know how it might influence others.
right.
So yeah.
Right.
So as we begin to continue on, then I'm wondering a little bit about your writing style. It's a very brutally honest tone. So I'm wondering where did that tone come from exactly? Why did you choose that sort of approach? I think it's really a powerful way to get it across. Was it intentional?
No, it wasn't. It ended up that way because that's all I knew.
Right.
Um, Again, as I said, I'm not an author, right? I mean, I became one, but I'm not one. I'm not a master storyteller, right? Or anybody with major qualifications to be able to put something like this together. However, I know, right, at one point it helped at least one person. So I if it can help one, and it came about as me, just exposing the pain that I felt and being honest without worrying about what anybody would think. Um, that's really all I knew. If I tried to change it into something else, maybe something more academic or something like that, I don't think I would be able to do it. So again, from my very early days, when I started writing, it was all about emotion, right? You go through troubles at school, you meet people, you get bullied, it, right? You just get it out, and it's full of emotion and passion. So that's what ended up on the paper and is now a book. So, which is pretty amazing to me. Anybody anybody who knows me, I'm like thinking my family's going to see this, right? I mean, they're great support. Um, but if anybody was going to be an author, right, it would be one of the, or two of the, or three of the other three siblings. So I'm probably the one who would be least likely to become an author. So,
Yeah. Well, hey, it's always in the most unexpected places that you find that sort of talent, right?
yeah, it's
And
crazy.
good thing you did. So now that the book's out there, I'm wondering what's next on your agenda. Are you thinking of writing any other books? What's your current mission now that it's out? What's next?
I will. It may be surprising, but um, as I mentioned, right, you never know how you're going to impact somebody's life, right? But last night, thinking about doing this podcast, my first ever, I was obviously nervous and started to let my, thoughts start going weird and negative. And I was like, no, wait a second, what is the benefit of doing this? And it goes back to what my current wife Jennifer said, right? There's got to be one other, right? There's got to be one other. So by you giving me a voice, right, and you doing what you do, right, there may be one other out there that we can help. So um I had to look at it and say, pull up your bootstraps, get over it, relax, breathe. It's gonna be okay. But also, because of this interview, I started thinking to myself about some uh, other really awesome life events that happened to me, and I was inspired because it kicked up some ideas in terms of, man, I think I can help. I think I can help somebody else in another way, right? So how did all this happen? Here I am, right? You find out about me. You're kind enough to invite me on your show. I'm nervous the night before. It stimulates a thought. It brings back a memory of something that I think people would like to hear. And here we are now. I got an idea in my head for maybe the next one. So your question is prophetic.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to hear that it's inspiring change. I think, if whether a writer, whether you're hosting a podcast, whatever it is, as long as you're getting your stories across and you're sharing these tips and tricks, then, again, you never know who's going to be impacted. So that's wonderful news to hear.
Yeah.
So all this being said, then I'm wondering if people do want to get in touch and stay up to date with new books, what's the best way to reach you?
They can drop a message at on my website, brokennessandnewbeginnings.com, and I'll be sure to read everyone and respond as I have. So I appreciate it.
Well, perfect. Amazing. Well, you heard it here, everybody. We're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast today, so you can go ahead and click over and get to know a little bit more about Frank and his journey and stay up to date with new books. Just thank you so much for joining us. It's been a true pleasure to hear about your tale and also to learn about your writing tips. I think a lot of people out there are going to learn a bunch from it. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Danielle.
Of course. And to all of our listeners, again, if you want to connect, go ahead and click on the links. Check out the book, Brokenness and New Beginnings, a story of hope for those facing separation and divorce. And just remember, every expert was once a beginner, every master is once a disaster, and every author is once just someone with a story needing to be told. So until next time, keep writing your mission into the world. Have a great day, everybody.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.